Hello everybody, sorry that this took so long. There's a little confusion about getting started, and so I'll have to use my phone, which wasn't the plan in the first case, but I hope everyone is tuned in, and thank you to Brainerd for the invitation to talk today. He asked me to speak about the subject of success, which is something that I wrote about recently on my website, so just for a little shameless self-promotion, that's at danielkingery.com, and there you can find the text. So I'm an artist. Like I said, my name is Daniel Kingery, and I'm a painter, an artist, a writer, and filmmaker, and I live currently in New York. I was in Berlin for 12 years, up until 2013, and those experiences were some of the things that informed my ideas now about what it means to be an artist, what it means to be successful as an artist. And I wanted to share just a few of those with you now. I liked Brainerd's idea for this discussion that it would be about writing a letter to a younger artist. And I've had a lot of talks over the years, people I've worked with in different jobs who are a few years younger than me, and they also, it's been interesting to exchange with younger artists ideas about success, so I'd like to share a few of those with you today. And the idea for the essay that I initially wrote it came from a meeting I had with another artist, and I went to his studio, and he started to talk with me about this idea of success, and he'd been asking people there, what is the secret to success as an artist? And he'd been talking to other artists, other business people, and they had kept, saying the same thing again and again, and what they were saying was that success was dependent on your connections and your community. And they all seemed to agree on this. But I had to totally disagree with him based on my own experiences. And part of those experiences, like I said in the introduction to the invitation for this event, was that I spent 12 years in Berlin, and while I was there, I was able to network a lot. I had jobs as a gallery assistant at a very prominent gallery at various points, and through that I was able to meet lots and lots of people in the art world all of a sudden, and suddenly I knew lots of other artists and curators, collectors, and things of that nature, and I set about organizing my own exhibitions. I got tired of waiting around for exhibitions to come to me, and I started to organize my own exhibitions, and that was very helpful and successful in a lot of ways. It helped me to meet lots of people and get my name out there in a way that I hadn't before, so all of a sudden some people knew who I was, but at the same time, I still didn't have this kind of success that I was really looking for, that we might define as a typical kind of art world success, and that I would say would mean something like having a major gallery represent you and selling your works for lots of money and being in major exhibitions, biennials, or something of that nature. And I think I'd had unrealistic expectations, partially because when I first got more heavily involved in the art world, I had a job at a gallery, and I got to see a lot of people who I knew go from being totally obscure to being very prominent and successful artists, and go from being in a position similar to mine to making millions of dollars within a very short period of time. So at the time I thought naively, okay, that's just how this works. You make your work, you get it out there, and meet lots of people, and then at a certain point people just start throwing money at you. And of course, after some years of experience, I realized that's not really how it works. So I wanted to talk about what I've learned over the years, what I think is more important to success and to being a successful artist. So one of the problems with this idea that just having a good network and that kind of thing will make you a successful artist is that it has a flip side, which is kind of ugly. I mean, I think that it's, in general, it is, of course it's necessary, but it's not the essential thing. And the flip side of it that's ugly is has to do a lot with envy. So if you say what makes you successful is having connections and contacts and things like that, then the flip side of it is every time you see a successful artist, you think, oh, the reason why they're successful is because they have the right contacts, they know the right people. And I've seen this kind of argument all the time, and it's used a lot when you see someone who's making it, who's, you know, becoming successful, and saying, oh, well, they just have that because they're friends with so-and-so, or because, you know, this, that, or the other. And I don't really think that that's true. I don't really think that that's how it works, because you can have lots of contacts and still not be a successful artist. I think that the most important thing, what I want to speak primarily about today, is cultivating who you are as an artist and working on your inner voice and what you have to say. And so I think that the three things that are most essential to being successful as an artist, well, the first one is a kind of perseverance in the face of potentially endless adversity. So, you know, if you're getting into art because you think you're going to become rich and famous or something like that, you're probably in the wrong field altogether, because most artists don't become rich and famous. It's a very small minority that do, and of course, there are many advantages to becoming successful in that way, but that can't be your goal. And I think that if you have that as your goal, you're not only in the wrong field, but you're approaching it in the wrong way entirely. And perseverance is the most important ingredient to that, because you will probably not have a lot of people for most of your career as an artist. Even if you become in some sense successful, you probably will not have a lot of people who are patting you on the back and telling you good job all the time. And so I think one of the most important things to learn is to cultivate a kind of inner sense of purpose that is totally separated from any outside affirmation, anything that, you know, if you're dependent on exterior motivations for your work, you're going to have a really hard time. And it sounds like a cliche, but I think that it's really true. The only way to truly fail or not become successful is to give up. So just not giving up is the most important thing you can do as an artist, I think, and just believing in yourself and going forward with your work, no matter what other people say. One of the best pieces of advice that I ever heard is from Andy Warhol, and he said, don't worry about what other people think about your work. While it's not up to you to decide if something's good or bad, what you should do is just make more work. And while other people are discussing whether it's good or bad or whatever, just keep making more art. And I think that's an incredibly good piece of advice for any artist in order to separate yourself from your work's reception, which is a hard thing to do. You have to be totally independent of it, because if you listen too much to what other people think, you're going to lose your own unique voice. And of course, a friend pointed out recently, you know, art is about communication, and of course it is. You're trying to communicate something, but you can only be responsible for one half of that. So you have to be very precise about who you are, what you have to say, and why. And if you have that, that's the most important ingredient by far. So that's my second point, which is what's essential to being a successful artist, I think, is having a coherent body of work that reflects a unique point of view, your point of view, and no one else can tell you what that is. And every single individual in this world is absolutely unique, and your experiences are never going to be repeated or experienced in the same way by anyone else in the history of time. So whatever you have to say, whoever you are, that's your voice. And it requires looking very deeply within and finding that place where you have your perspective. And some people can argue, and I've heard this, of course, why should people care about you? Why should people care what you have to say? And the way I usually respond to that is by one of my favorite artists of any genre is the author James Joyce. And what he had to say about that was, after he'd finished writing Ulysses, he went to celebrate with friends in Paris. And they went to a bar. And at the bar, They were drinking. Another Irish writer came up to him and he said, Joyce said to the other writer, he said, what are you writing about? Are you writing about Dublin? And the other artist said, no, I feel like Dublin's too provincial. Irish writers need to orient themselves towards Europe. And Joyce said, no, you're exactly wrong. He said, if I can get Dublin right, then I can get everything right. Because contained within the particular is the universal. So the more true you are to yourself and what your experience is and what you have to say, the truer your art will be and the more it will resonate with others. This is how pop music works, which has been one of the things I've been interested in my work. I used to think, when I was making art, or if I was writing a song or doing something like this, that I wanted to make something good that I liked, and that maybe other people, other colleagues would somehow respond to, and would somehow gain their approval or something like this. And it was a big shift in my life and in my artistic career, after moving to New York, that things came into new focus, and it's I think what Jasper Johns describes when he talks about the condition of being an artist or wanting to be an artist. In many ways, before that, I was in the condition of wanting to be an artist. And after that, I became in the condition of just being an artist. So that comes from making work that comes from a place deep within yourself, independent of all these other factors, essentially. And when I make a work now, I don't make that work because, of course I do it, I'd love to do it, and I'm making something that I would love to see as an artwork, but I'm also making it because I have a specific thing I have to say in exactly that way, and I have a specific emotional need to say that, and nothing else. So that's what it means, I think, to have your own artistic voice. And because I got accused of that years ago, I had a studio visit with a conceptual artist who's maybe 10 years older than me, and I was in a phase that was a kind of transition, and it was very important for me in the development of my work, but it wasn't an end unto itself. It was still a phase of experimentation. So this artist came to my studio, and he said, essentially, I wasn't being true enough to myself, or saying what only I could say, but I was in some ways conforming myself to the art world in general. I heard, I believe, something from Ryan McGinley where he said this at a talk to art students, where he said, don't compete. Don't try to do, if you're competing with what other people are doing, then you're doing the same kind of thing as them, and you're just trying to do it a little bit better, or something like that. Whereas it's better, I think, in many ways, to more or less ignore what other people are doing. It's good to be aware. It's good to be aware of what's going on in the art world and the art scene, what other artists or your colleagues are doing. But I think it's better not to think about it too much, to just follow your own instincts, and that has to come from a place, like I was saying, that comes from deep within. And another thing that a very successful curator, a British curator, said to me one time, which I think is a very good point, he said, art is all about critical mass. So anyone can make one or two good artworks, and I've seen this in other people when I've seen their work sometimes. Anyone could come up with something good every once in a while, but what a curator or someone else needs to see is, can you do it consistently? Can you again and again make an interesting work that together forms a coherent body of work that expresses your unique point of view? So that's, I think, essentially what you need to do. That's my advice. And that's what I found to be the most fruitful and productive in creating my own works. And I think that, like I was saying, the third sort of point is that place has to come deep within you. It can't be contrived or constructed in some way. It has to be real, and it has to be true to you. And some of the early experiences I had within the art world, I was lucky enough, like I said, to see people go from total obscurity to success, to becoming famous and wealthy, or this kind of thing, having shows everywhere, being in museums. And I've also seen a few times people go from success back to obscurity, and this can happen too. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's not just about having a coherent body of work, it's about having this body of work be totally true to you and who you are, and making it whether you're successful with it or not, because I've seen that happen a few times. Someone can become successful, and then maybe they're either approaching that work in a somewhat too superficial way, and then at a certain point, things kind of fall apart for them. Or maybe they get trapped into a certain style that was catching on, but isn't totally exactly what they have to say, and then they feel forced to continue with something that they don't totally believe in. So that's a kind of trap that you can get into, and that's a danger as well. So that's the other thing, there are ways, I think, to contrive this kind of success by networking, coming up with some kind of a body of work that's some way consistent, but isn't totally true to you. So I think the most important thing, like I said, is to do the work, which is the most difficult work, to be unafraid, to look as deeply within as possible, and to find out what that is, who you are, and what you have to say, and in what way. One of the things that I really like too, one of my favorite artists, is the filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky, and he said, the artist invents the means to say what they have to say. So if you find that thing that you have to say, you'll also find the means with which to say it. So you don't worry about the means so much as the content. And once you find that content, the form will follow, based on who you are, what you have to say, what your natural proclivities are. I read The Lives of the Artists recently by Vasari, and that was true of Raphael. So he, at various points in his life, he had studied under this painter Perugino, and he'd mastered his style. And he thought, okay, I found it, I've got my voice. Then he saw the work of Leonardo and Michelangelo, and he thought, wait a minute, I've got to change this up, I have to start from scratch and learn how to do this all over again. And he looked, and he was able to discern what his strengths and his weaknesses are. He realized he'd never be as good as Michelangelo at painting the nude figure. But he had other things that he could do. He could excel in coloring, in dynamic compositions, in groups of characters, in design, in the kinds of landscapes and the backgrounds and the sort of drapers and things people wear. And he had other strengths and weaknesses. So the thing to do, I think, is to know yourself, know your strengths and weaknesses, cultivate those, and use those to find your own consistent artistic voice, and with that, make a body of work that's true to you, and to do it no matter what anyone else thinks. So that's my advice to a young artist. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday and week ahead. Thank you very much.